Since their addition to the game in 1.6, map packs have been one of the most consistently hated parts of Geometry Dash. Despite the fact that completing them all is the only way to get all the secret coins in the game, you'll rarely come across people who have completed all or even most of them. In fact, it's far more common to find people openly admitting to hacking them, which is a pretty strong marker for their perception in the community. However, as is often the case, there's a distinct lack of specific criticisms for the map packs. Generally, it's just taken as self-evident that they're awful, normally with vague reference to how badly they play. Being the pretentious Square game analyst that I am, this wasn't enough for me, and so rather than taking the sensible route and just asking competent people what they thought, I instead made the decision to beat all 195 map pack levels to find out exactly what went wrong myself. At first, this didn't seem like too difficult to prospect. Most of the levels are below Demon, and very few of the demons are any higher than Medium, and so off the bat I wasn't too concerned about how long this was actually going to take me to finish, or how I'd feel partway through. However, once I was starting to get into the Insanes and Demons, multiple obvious and obstructive problems began to rear their heads. The last few Demons and UFO packs, which I had foolishly left for last, made up some of the most unbearable hours of grinding I've ever experienced in a video game. Anyway, having suffered through that, I might as well get some content out of it. So let's talk about what led the map packs to turn out the way they did. The first major problem you can gather from the quality of the map pack levels and of the feature as a whole is a lack of proper curation. Let's pretend that you're a relatively new player and you've either gotten bored with or completed the main levels, and are looking for something else to get your hands on. If your focus drifts towards the map packs, you would have a few inherent expectations of what the feature might entail, most likely being to provide a collection of some of the better levels in the game in order to allow new players like you to more easily integrate with a broader range of difficulty and gameplay variety. As a consequence, you would expect the map pack levels to be chosen with a certain amount of care in order to fulfill this expectation, this being curation. However, when you get into the map packs, you'll very quickly discover that this is not the case. The presence of levels like Corrupted Kingdom is a clear sign that something's gone wrong when deciding which levels were selected, with the only possible explanations for its inclusion being that Rob is an absolute god at ship control, or he just didn't properly check it out beforehand. And considering the Clubstep V2 incident, the latter's probably more likely. This isn't particularly surprising. Even with the addition of mods in mid-2014, the community lacked the kind of interconnectivity we have today, as well as it being nowhere near its current size. This fact itself is another part of the curation problem. A less developed community means less levels, which means less good levels. And this poses a significant problem when trying to execute a concept like the map packs. Because when your community is made up of about 6 people and 5 of them are making garbage while 1 is only making slight garbage, you really don't have a lot of choice in which levels to put in. The lack of good levels isn't solely a result of a relatively small and new community though. The restrictions of the editor at the time means that the map packs tend to blend together into one monotonous grind through levels that all generally play and look very similar. Objects like speed portals didn't have the chance to exist for most of the map pack's lifespan, and until I played them I don't think I was fully able to grasp how much additional engagement is generated by speed. Especially from the perspective of someone who's used to speed changes, the map pack levels lack so much energy as a result of their absence. What's more, restrictions of the editor alongside creator-to-creator inspiration also causes rampant monotony in the gameplay style of a lot of older levels. Most of the map pack levels, particularly the demons, which by the way are the most prevalent pack type, are made difficult through fake-based memory, which is probably my least favourite gameplay style. It's in no way comparable to the standard of current memory, again given the restrictions of the time, but at a certain point you begin to notice that the tricks used to increase difficulty are generally all extremely similar, mostly just consisting of knowing which orbs do the bad, and there's very little difference in this style between making your level hard and making your level frustrating. Even though creators were certainly limited at the time, I feel like the instances where people managed to do something even mildly interesting with fakes were few and far between, and it makes beating all these levels extremely dull. I felt like a lot of the time the choice of levels wasn't actually testing my skill, but more how much of my brain I could empty of actually useful information in order to fill it with the knowledge of which clicks I had to do to win. The playing experience of a level like this tended to boil down to going through practice once, learning all the off-screen jumps and random choke points, going back to the start and realizing you forgot about the 700,000 fakes in the first half, going back into practice and forcing yourself to do runs on an easy demon in order to actually remember it, and then slowly and painfully grinding through the level in normal mode until you complete it. This probably sounds like a massive case of skill issues, but it's made even more frustrating by the fact that it isn't. You get very little satisfaction out of beating any given map pack level, specifically because none of them are actually that hard skill-wise. Although the realization that you're not going to make it through the remaining 194 levels that are almost exactly like the one you just beat without ludicrous amounts of Class A narcotics at hand certainly doesn't help either. On top of the gameplay, the limits to song choice also make the map packs an absolute chore to play. There are fundamentally restricted ways in which to make your level work with a particular song, and this is limited further by what people will conceivably do to achieve that. Even though creators physically could not use songs other than those of the main levels in game before 1.9, the repetition of the same songs over and over again makes the map pack levels incredibly boring to play, partly because very few stand out from the rest in the way they use those songs. It's probably a good thing that most of the map pack levels are as interested in a strong focus on music sync as I was in playing them, since I ended up listening more to whichever video I had on in the background, rather than slowly losing my mind over the first few notes of Theory of Everything being burnt directly into my prefrontal cortex. The overall theme of monotony for the vast majority of the map pack levels is one with an easy fix to me. There should have just been less levels. I would have found the Insane and Demon packs significantly more bearable if there had only been 3 or 4 of them instead of the 14 and 18 that we're presented with respectively. The problem is that there were so many levels in the primary release of the map packs alone that adding more in future updates was always going to lead to them being a nightmare to complete. Maybe the aim of having such a large number of levels was to give the player more choice in which levels they wanted to beat, and I'd be more inclined to agree if it were not for the existence of 4 separate remix packs which by their nature pretty much guarantee that any player going into them is going to get bored relatively quickly, especially a more modern one like myself. The journey of a modern player through the map packs is undoubtedly a lot worse than those who were presented with them on release, for a couple of reasons. The first of these is that a significant number of levels are either impossible or much harder on higher refresh rates, which a much larger portion of the community now has access to. This is very much the equivalent of a first world problem for GD at the moment, but for anyone used to playing on those refresh rates, it certainly adds an additional level of frustration, which may become a more prevalent complaint in the future depending on how the 2.2 FPS bypass functions. Secondly, a fair few levels have received updates since their initial inclusion in the map packs, ranging from adding a few pieces of text to the most unimaginably horrible vomit of new features possible, which generally just serve to make the visuals... Well, honestly, these levels were a lot more fun to look at than the bland nothingness they were surrounded by. At least they made me smile a bit in the few seconds it took to realise that the gameplay was now utterly atrocious as a consequence. If a modern player wants to play something like the map packs, they should and would go straight for the gauntlets. Don't get me wrong, a good number of the gauntlet levels also play fairly poorly, but they're generally a lot more skill based than the map pack levels, and as a result I think many would find them less frustrating overall. What's more, the gauntlets were established on a much closer relationship between Rob, the mods, and the community, with the later gauntlets in particular being purpose built. Unlike the map packs, which I'm assuming didn't involve as much as a warning to the creators who are about to have their levels beaten down by every 9-year-old on the planet. The gauntlets are also laid out in a far more visually pleasing way, the themes are much stronger, the rewards are better, there's far more variety, and there's just less of them. Even though I haven't beaten them all, I can assure you that they make for a far better and more engaging player experience than the map packs. And if you're looking to complete one or the other, you probably save time, sanity, and money going for the gauntlets. I don't doubt this was Rob's intention when setting them up, especially since he hasn't added to the map packs since 2.1 came out, but it certainly adds further redundancy to an already outdated part of the core game when even the developer seems to think they aren't good for much. However, now I've got the opportunity, I thought it still might be worthwhile to highlight some of the better levels in the map packs, aka those which managed to make me feel an emotion other than intense boredom and seething hatred. Largely because levels that are inspired by their limitations rather than crushed under them will always be interesting to look at. Creativity is timeless after all, and even that 1 out of 6 chance eventually has to produce something with a bit more substance to it. Of course, a lot of the better map pack levels are made by our favourite creator turned box meta enthusiast, Funny Game. Some of the most recognisable of his map pack featured works are Checkmate, Requiem, and Funny Game Holiday, all of which show both the diversity of his style and his general creativity. Funny Game Holiday in particular is known for being viewed as the first effect level in the game, and for that title I think it does a very good job. Stacking these objects to create a visualizer is an idea years ahead of its time, and is one of those levels I wish I'd been around to see when it first dropped. While the more modern Funny Game levels obviously have a lot more depth, I think older levels like this are still pretty engaging today for what they managed to achieve, as well as not being totally unbearable to play. Speaking of, Laser Room is another highlight of the map packs for me, even though visually it certainly doesn't do anything particularly interesting compared to the rest. This is because it's by far one of the most enjoyable map pack demons, and while that might not be saying much considering that the majority of the demon packs feel like they were made by a drunk toddler with a severe lack of functioning limbs, I still think it's a very good choice to play, even as a first demon. It's generally a fair bit easier to read and learn than some of its colleagues, and a lot of the gameplay feels very bouncy and lively without causing insane amounts of bugs and annoyances. The final old school level I want to mention is Dimension Machine, which just gave me a few nice surprises in the way it was laid out and how it managed to pull off some of the more bizarre structuring without being too obnoxious in terms of playing it. I think there's a lot of inspiration you can get from this kind of gameplay, although since designs have gotten a lot more complex since then, it's certainly harder to execute properly. As for the newer levels, which are definitely overall the ones I preferred, one of the highlights is edification. While I'd normally have a problem with the level ending so abruptly, I think in this case it doesn't matter too much to me because edification feels more like an effect showcase than something pretending to be a full level. And given that a lot of people seem to like it for what it is, I think that's a perfectly reasonable form to take, especially when the effect it presents suits itself so well to that idea. The sentiment is on the flip side of a level like Retray, which obviously I have to mention here, even if its popularity means I can't be a quirky little contrarian with my level preferences for once. I might be able to save my reputation slightly by saying that the original 1.9 version of the level is almost certainly my favourite. I think the stuff added by later updates either adds very little to the original level or just feels straight up tacky. It's a shame really, because it feels like a huge contrast to how fresh the original level feels among other 1.9 levels where any style beyond design was still in very early stages. Of all the map pack levels, I think this is definitely the one that stood the test of time the most, something which would have remained true even if the level had never been updated, since the original version is still super clean and consistently themed in colour and in art style. All in all, despite the multitude of inherent and execution problems with the map packs, not every single level in them is awful. There's a few more good map pack levels that I didn't even get round to talking about, but I'll leave a link to the rest of my favourites in the description. I think any creator could definitely look to these levels as a source of potential inspiration, as long as you aren't too surface level with it since they're hugely aesthetically outdated for the most part. However, unless you're one of those people that likes to torture themselves over stats, then it's absolutely not worth beating all the map packs just to experience a few half decent levels. I'm not sure I regret doing it myself, but you can take it from me that you're really not missing much if you've got those parental controls on.